controlling worry. So we want to be able to recognise when we're worrying, because often what we find is that we can worry for a long time before we even recognise that we're doing so, and it can take up so much of our time and our ability to concentrate on the here and now. And then once we've been able to recognise that worry, we're then going to have a look at a few tools and techniques for managing the worry that we're experiencing. So let us start by thinking about what worry is. So how do we feel when we're feeling worried? How do we recognise that we're worrying about something? So a question over to you. If you want to pop your thoughts and ideas back to me, please do so via the question and answer box, or just have a think about how you recognise in yourself when you're feeling worried. For any of you who missed or have just joined us, there is a slight delay between what I say and what you hear, so I will just pause for a second to allow the system to catch up. So someone's popped in there, not being able to shake thoughts from your mind. Absolutely. Someone else has put feeling restless and on edge. Yeah, definitely. Not being able to concentrate. Absolutely. Lovely. Thank you for those thoughts. Agree with all of them. Worry has such a huge impact on how we feel, both physically and emotionally. So you may have heard worry being called generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, or GAD. So worry is also known as generalized anxiety disorder, and it's usually defined by the inability to shake recurring thoughts from our mind. These thoughts usually grasshopper, and before we know it, we're thinking about the worst possible scenario of a situation. So I like to think about worry a little bit like a big heavy metal chain. So the first worry we experience is that first link in the chain, the next worry is the next link in the chain, and so forth. And before we know it, we're carrying around this big heavy metal chain that's really debilitating, and it really impacts on our ability to carry out our day to day. So as an example, it may be that we start with a thought or a worry about our boss being mad at us. And then before we know it, we've grasshopper jumped to thinking that we're going to lose our job. If we lose our job, how are we going to pay our mortgage? Then where are we going to live? And before we know it, we're thinking about that worst possible situation. So worry is on a continuum. On the left-hand side, we have being worried so much that it's uncontrollable and it impacts on our day to day. And on the right-hand side, we have being so laid back that we're virtually horizontal. We probably all know somebody like this and are sometimes quite envious of them and that they don't seem to have a care in the world. But worry is good for us. We do need a little bit of worry. We want to be somewhere in the middle, because if we're too laid back, we're not going to have the drive to put into place the things we need. For example, if our pets or our children are unwell and we just don't worry about it, they're not going to get the care they need. So we need a little bit of worry, but if we're worrying continuously about everything and anything, it's really going to impact on how we feel, and that's going to be exhausting. So we want to be somewhere in the middle. So let's have a think then how we might notice that worry has become a problem. So it may become a problem for us when it becomes excessive, uncontrollable, present most days, and affects our ability to focus on the present. So it may leave us feeling anxious, fidgety, shaky, restless, fast heart rate. All of these symptoms are linked to our fight or flight response, because it's a situation that makes us feel vulnerable. So if you haven't joined us on the other sessions of the 3 anxiety series, in the session on understanding and controlling anxiety and panic, we do talk a lot about the fight or flight. So if you notice these physical symptoms having a real big impact when you're feeling anxious and worried, please do join us for those sessions to look at how to manage those physical symptoms. We may be feeling overwhelmed, find it difficult to think things through clearly. We might not be able to concentrate, and we might not be present. So we may be in a conversation with somebody, but despite having that conversation, in our mind, we're elsewhere, we're worrying, we're thinking about something else that's going on. So for a clinical diagnosis of worry or generalised anxiety disorder by your GP, the clinical diagnostic criteria is to experience anxiety or worry about several things for at least 6 months. I personally feel that 6 months is an awful long time, and any amount of worry that is impacting on us is completely exhausting. And it should be something that we recognise and we start to put into place tools and techniques to help with how we're feeling. If you've joined me on any of the other sessions, you'll be familiar with this vicious cycle. So whenever we're not feeling ourselves, whether we're feeling down, anxious, low, however that might be, we get stuck in vicious cycles of how our thoughts impact on our physical symptoms impact on our behaviours, and so forth. So looking at this cycle is based upon the principles of cognitive behaviour therapy. So what I would say is that whenever you're not feeling yourself, draw this cycle out. What's running through my mind at the moment? How am I physically feeling within my body? And what behaviour changes am I doing or have I done differently recently? And the sooner we get to understand our own vicious cycles, the sooner we can put into place tools and techniques to help break out of this cycle, and things will start to feel a little bit better. So this is a typical cycle that we might experience when we're feeling worried. You've probably noticed that worry is sat in the behaviour part of that cycle. That's because worry is something that we actively engage in, therefore it is a behaviour. The individual thoughts that run through our mind are those worries. And because worry is a behaviour, it is something that we can actively change. We can actively control the amount of time that we spend worrying. Easier said than done, I completely appreciate, but hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll have a few tools and techniques to try to help to control that worry. So it may be that thoughts are running through our mind, things like, did I send that email? Is my boss angry with me? This then changes those physical symptoms. Our fight or flight response starts to kick in. So we feel hot, dizzy, achy, tired. And these thoughts and these physical symptoms change our behaviours. So we worry, we perhaps can't sit still alongside that fight or flight response. We might procrastinate, we might put things off that we're worrying about, or we might not have the headspace to engage in activities because we're worried. And a usual behaviour we notice is reassurance seeking. Things that we perhaps usually do without second guessing suddenly become things that make us feel anxious, and we're just checking that everything is okay. So with tools and techniques, we can learn to manage this and break out of this vicious cycle. But like I say, recognising it is usually the hardest step. So practice this vicious cycle for yourself in order for you to pick up on it earlier. What can be really helpful as a first step when we're thinking about understanding and managing worry is writing our worries down. Catch the worries and get them out of our head. Thoughts and worries have a lot of power and a lot of heat when they're rattling around in our mind. When we get them out and get them down onto paper or on a phone, whatever's easiest for you, this allows us to take an emotional step back from the worry, and it also helps us to see the worry differently. It can be a skill in itself to learn to catch these worries and write them down, but hopefully over time it will become easier. I think of it a little bit like the childhood game, that elephant, where the elephant blows out butterflies out of its trunk and we catch the butterflies. First time we do it, it's really difficult, and with time and practice and perseverance, that becomes easier and easier. Also, by writing a worry down, it helps us to reframe the way we think about it. There have been loads of times when I've written a worry down and I think, oh, blimey, Lucy, I hope nobody sees that. That's ridiculous, because that's enough to help us to challenge the thoughts that are running through our mind. But if that isn't enough, then we can look at these techniques we're going to go through now to help to manage that. What I would say is that if you are a nighttime worrier, so as soon as you go to bed at night, your mind comes to life with thoughts and worries, keep a notepad at the side of your bed, because if you write these worries down, it just helps to shake them from your mind. It helps to clear them. What we usually find with nighttime worry is that we're worrying about things that are future focused, so about the next day and not forgetting to do something. So by writing it down and getting into the habit of checking the notepad in the morning will help us to know that we can switch off, we can relax and go to sleep because we've written down what we need to do, and therefore it will get done. So just a little tip for if you're struggling to get to sleep. If writing the worries down is not enough and these worries persist, we then want to identify which type of worry that we're experiencing. So there are two different types of worry. There are practical worries and hypothetical worries. A way to distinguish between the two is asking ourselves, can I do anything about this? If the answer is no, no matter how much I think and I worry about this, it's not going to change the outcome, then that is a hypothetical worry. What we find with hypothetical worries is that they're usually future focused and they usually start with what if. So for example, what if I can't get to work tomorrow if it snows? Here in the UK, anything could happen with the weather. What if my train is late? Or what if my kids fail their exams? No matter how much energy and effort I put into those worries, it isn't going to change the outcome. I cannot change the future. Whereas with practical worries, there is something that we can physically do to put a plan into place to practically solve them. There is something that's within our control, within our power that we can do. So we're going to start with hypothetical worries because what we find is that when we're feeling anxious, a lot of our thoughts are future focused hypothetical worries. This is completely normal and natural. It's just about helping to control and to manage these thoughts and these worries. Like I've said, with hypothetical worries, no matter how much we worry about it, we're not going to change the outcome. So we want to use a technique to manage the amount of time that we spend worrying. So this is a technique which is called worry time. It isn't that these worries aren't important and aren't worthy of our worry, because they absolutely are. Anything that we're worrying about is important to us. So, for example, it may be that a family member is poorly or unwell, and that's probably a hypothetical worry because no matter how much energy and time we spend thinking and worrying about that, unfortunately, that isn't going to change that outcome. But we deserve to worry about that. That's important to us. So we can worry about it, but at a time that is good for us rather than it consuming our whole entire day. So this technique puts ourselves back in the driving seat with controlling the worry rather than the worry controlling us. People who just say or think, oh, I just won't worry about it, or just don't worry about it, that's not helpful. Because if we just keep brushing our worries under the carpet, eventually that carpet is going to be so high that we're not going to be able to walk on it. So it's so important that we do worry, but we just control the amount of time we spend worrying so it doesn't consume us. The worry time's got a number of steps. A lot of people are quite skeptical of this technique when I talk through it. However, with practice and perseverance, it is so incredibly powerful. So if you are a little bit skeptical as I'm talking through it, please just have an open mind and give it a try, because if it's done properly, it can be so incredibly helpful in managing these future focused worries that we all experience, but sometimes they just feel a little bit unmanageable, which is where worry time might be helpful. So to start with, we want to identify 20 to 30 minutes of our day to carry out worry time. There is no right or wrong in when you want to dedicate some time to worry. Some people prefer to do it at the end of a long busy day. Other people prefer to clear their heads first thing in the morning. There's no one size fits all, so find what works for you. And then throughout the day, we want to write our worries down. Get them out of our head, down onto paper or down on our phone, whatever works for you, again, to help to create that emotional distance. But we're not going to think any more about that worry right now. We'll think about that worry when we get to worry time. So what we want to try to do is switch that switch to stop us from worrying about it right now. I know that's easier said than done, and we don't have a magic switch in our brain, but the more we practice it, eventually we will learn that we're not going to think about it now, we'll think about it at worry time. A way to help to switch with that is by refocusing on the present, carrying out a mindfulness activity. Can be anything at all. One that I find works particularly well for me is the 5 senses. So tuning into what I can hear, see, smell, touch and taste just brings me back into the here and now. making a hot drink and being really mindful about that drink and how that tastes and how that feels, or having a look out the window and being mindfulness, tuning into what you can see, anything that takes us away from our thoughts of our worry and back into the here and now and into the moment. There are some fantastic apps out there that help with this. For example, Headspace or Calm have really great mindfulness activities. YouTube, there's so much available. And you also have access to mindfulness classes through Vita Health Group, which complement these sessions really lovely. And then we want to repeat it. So every time we notice a worry pop into our mind, we want to write it down and then refocus on the present, even if it's a couple of minutes after the last time we wrote it down. Get it out of your head, down onto paper, and go from there. And then we want to carry out our worry time. So what you decide to do at worry time is entirely your choice. For some people, talking through worries with a trusted loved one is helpful. For other people, just thinking about their worries is helpful. Me personally, I find it quite helpful to write my worries down and keep writing them out to help me to process them. Again, find what works for you. We're all completely different in what would be helpful at this time, but it's about allowing us time to think about the things that are bothering us and that are worrying us at this moment in time. What you may find for day-to-day worries, it may be that whatever you were worrying about has passed. For example, if I was worrying about being late to work, it may be that I got to work on time, and so I've saved myself that time spent that I would have spent on that worry. Whereas with more persistent worries, it's that time to allow us to process them, to think them through. The end of worry time, we want to refocus on the here and now. So again, it'd be wonderful if we had that switch, but unfortunately we don't. So do an activity that I like to call a step off the face of the earth, where we really throw ourselves into something that doesn't allow us the headspace or the capacity to think about anything else. Again, it's different for everybody. I like to cook a meal because I really have to concentrate on the recipe and focusing on what I'm doing. Or other techniques might be to go to the gym or go for a walk or for a run or have a hot bath, have a cup of tea in the garden. Again, whatever works for you to help us to switch off from the worry and refocus back in on the here and now. And we repeat it. So every time we notice a worry, after worry time, pop into our mind, get it out of our head, write it down, and we'll save that worry to think about at the next worry time. This is a real skill. It would be lovely, like I say, if we could do it immediately and we'd be able to control this worry overnight. But we're teaching our brain a whole new way of working. This is tough and it requires practice and perseverance. It's a little bit like training a puppy. The first time you ask a puppy to sit and stay, it isn't going to sit and stay. It takes practice and perseverance, and your worry puppy will eventually learn to sit and stay until worry time. If you're trying this technique and it's really difficult, you're finding it really tough to control the worries with worry time, seek support from people around you. Remember, your GP is there just as much for your mental health as your physical health. So see if you could access any further support if that would be helpful for you. If our worries are practical, so we've got practical worries, things that we can physically do something about, we use a technique which is called practical problem solving. So practical problem solving is a technique that we do every single day, usually without thinking about it. So sitting here this evening, we've all made choices today. We've all practically problem solved some things along the way, whether it was deciding what to wear based on the weather or what to have for lunch, or if you've got something out the freezer for tea. These are all decisions that you have made throughout today. However, when we're feeling really overwhelmed and stressed, what usually happens is that we find it really difficult to see through the wood through the trees because we're really feeling overwhelmed and we cannot see the options that we have in front of us. So with practical problem solving, it helps us to see things through clearer. Again, this technique you do every day, but it's just a process to help us think things through and take a step back from the overwhelming feeling that we experience. So what we want to do is identify the problem, because sometimes when we've got a situation that's ongoing, we have lots of thoughts and worries around the actual problem. So for example, if I was worried about breaking down on my way to work, if my car was making a funny sound, we may have lots of worries attached to that about whether we break down at a red light or on an island, or if I'm late for work, all of these worries that come alongside that. Whereas the practical problem within that is that my car is making a funny sound. And that is something that I can physically put a plan into place to help to solve. Then I want to identify all the possible solutions that are in front of me. Write them all down, whether they're doable or not at the moment, because even if they're not doable right now, they might be doable in the future. So get them all out onto pen and paper. I like to get involved loved ones, trusted loved ones in this as well, because often people have ideas that we've not even thought of, or they've been in a situation similar themselves and they've been able to shed some light or advice on the circumstance. And then for each solution, we want to identify the strengths and weaknesses for that. So for example, some of the solutions I wrote down might be taking my car to a garage, taking my car to a friend who's got more knowledge about cars than myself, or scrapping the car, or buying a new car, or ignoring the problem and turning the radio up. So we want to start to weigh up what the pros and cons of each solution is at this moment in time. It may be that you can automatically cross some of those off your list. So for example, for myself, I am unfortunately not in a position where I could just go out and buy a new car, so I could cross that one straight off my list. So the ones that feel more doable might be speaking to a friend or taking it to a garage. So I pick a solution, identify the one that works best for you at this moment in time. And then we want to physically do something about it, because we're very good at saying, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it next week, and then it never ever happens. So put into place a plan for it to actually happen. Break it right down. So if I'm going to, let's say, take it to a friend as my plan A, I want to block out time in my diary to contact my friend. And then when am I going to take it over to my friend? Because again, if we just keep saying we'll do it tomorrow, that will never happen. Whereas we found that if we physically schedule in an appointment or schedule it into our calendar or our diary to physically put that plan into place, we're much more likely to do that because we've protected time to do it. Implement the plan, and if it doesn't work, if plan A doesn't work, then we've got backup solutions. So in my situation, if my friend wasn't sure or they felt that it needed mechanical input, I could then take it to a garage. If plan A brings up more problems, so say I've done plan A, we're going to take it to a garage, and with plan B, I'm now got this worrying concern about how I'm going to afford to fix it. Let's just say it's £800, for example. I then might be worrying about how can I afford to fix my car. So go back to the basics, go back to square one. What's the problem in this new circumstance? What are all my options and solutions? What are my strengths and weaknesses? And pick a solution. So again, none of this is new, but we find it so difficult to do this just in our heads when we're feeling really overwhelmed. What I would say is that if you've got a couple of practical problems going on at the moment, start with one that feels more manageable at the moment to start to tackle. And then once you get used to this technique, move on to one that feels a little bit more difficult and work your way up to the trickiest practical problem that you've got going on at the moment. Sometimes it isn't clear cut of whether it's a practical worry or a hypothetical worry, so we have to use both techniques at the same time. So for example, if I had an exam coming up, I can physically put a practical problem solving technique into play if I'm worrying about how well I do. I can revise, I can seek support from peers, I could perhaps do some exam prep, some practice questions, whatever that might be. Once I've sat that exam, more likely than not, I'm probably going to be worrying about how well I've done, what my results are, have I passed, all of these natural hypothetical worries that come alongside of that. But unfortunately now, no matter how much energy and effort I put into that worry about how well I've done, I've already sat that exam. So that's not going to change that outcome. That's not going to change that result. So then I might want to use worry time until I manage to get that result. Sometimes we have to use both techniques in the space of a day. So for example, it may be that we've put into place a practical problem a plan for that practical problem, but in the meantime, it's still causing us future focused worry about the outcome. So we then might want to use worry time to manage our worry until we get to that practical problem plan. So for example, last year my cat was really poorly, very suddenly very poorly, and I had to get him an emergency vet appointment. Unfortunately, because of how busy they were, I couldn't get him in for a couple of hours. But no matter how much I future focused worried about what the outcome of that appointment would be, that again wasn't going to change the outcome. And that wasn't good for me or for him to be really anxious and worried and stressed for those couple of hours. So sometimes we have to use that worry time to help us to get to control that worry until we put that plan into place. Again, these techniques are so tough and so difficult. And if you are struggling with worrying, you are struggling with these techniques, that's completely normal and understandable, especially in the world that we're all in at the moment. So please do reach out for support around you should you be struggling with this. Some additional resources that can help along the way are NHS self-help guides. So if you Google NHS self-help guides, the first one that comes up is by the Northumberland Tyne and Wear NHS service. So on there is about 20 to 30 booklets that are free NHS resources. They have blank vicious cycles in of how our thoughts, our physical symptoms and our behaviours all do link in together. So please have a look at those. They're fantastic free resources that are used both professionally and personally and for people around me. It's important that we're managing the physical symptoms of anxiety. So as we talk about in the other two sessions, progressive muscle relaxation is really helpful to help wind down that fight or flight response. So please join us on those sessions where I'll explain a little bit more about that. You've got the Headspace app and Calm app, which are both mindfulness apps, which are fantastic. You've also got free mindfulness activities on YouTube. And like I said earlier, the mindfulness classes via Vita Health Group. There is a fantastic worry time app, which is by the organisation called Reach Out. So on your app store, whether that's Apple or Android, if you search worry time, one should come up as a blue clock by an organisation called Reach Out. It's a fantastic app that really talks you through the worry time technique. It gives you positive affirmations once you pop a worry in, and it gives you a reminder at worry time. A really great resource. If you're not an appy person, then pen and paper works in exactly the same way. You've got Mind, which is a fantastic website which has lots of information about any difficulties with our mental health. And at the bottom there's a Managing Worry self-help guide, which has both of these techniques and step-by-steps to help you through that. I know that's an awful long hyperlink to write down, so please do pop me a question in the question and answer box if you'd like me to pop over the direct link to that booklet, which talks you through these techniques that I've just spoken through today. Another way with managing worry, when we think about hypothetical worries, it can be quite helpful to do something at the end of worry time to help to feel like we're physically getting rid of those worries. So I used to work with children and we used to use a worry monster. So we would think about the worries, we would talk them through together, and then we would write down our worries and feed them to the worry monster. And that just helped us to get rid of that worry from our mind. Don't expect you to go out and buy a worry monster, but anything that works. There are some lovely mindfulness activities where we think about our worries floating down the stream or floating off in a hot air balloon or whatever that might be. So those can really complement those thoughts and ideas as well. As I've mentioned throughout today, you also have your GP for support and you also have access to Samaritans. So the Samaritans are a 24-hour listening service. So we're there by the phone on 116123 and also via web chat helplines on their website. So fantastic resources should you need any further support. Please do join me on those other two sessions if they would be helpful for you, where we think about the physical symptoms of anxiety. This week I'm running the whole course at